unless your weekend plans involve drinks with the girlies, dinner and a lobotomy.
You'll be aware of the major news of the global economic order being turned upside down.
And it's not like things are going to calm down. The beatings will continue until morale improves. A cursory look at history shows that economic uncertainty is often a prelude to the subject we're tackling. Considering I'm not an economist, and the fact that the tariff percentages have been decided with all the economic rigour of putting Warren Buffett into a burlap sack, throwing him into a river and seeing if he floats, I'd say the benefits of deep diving into the deranged musings of America's witch doctor economist-in-chief are limited. Besides, he's put them on 90-day reprieve. So instead of watching 24-hour rolling news go for the next 2 months, let's see if he's a goose-stepping, Roman-saluting, card-carrying member of the party YouTube won't let you mention. The spring 2003 edition of the journal Free Inquiry contains an article by political scientist Dr. Lawrence Britt. Echoing Umberto Eco's seminal work, he analyses 7 regimes and produces 14 early warning signs of a coming goose-stepping regime. I'm going to split Britt's analysis into rhetoric and mechanics. This video will look at the first section. Don't worry, there's plenty to talk about. That's right, today's lesson is about rhetoric, so sit down and shut up. These sections are more about the narrative and psychological groundwork of fascism. Do these guys sound like authoritarians? Do they have the vibes? Do they say things that make us worry? Some of these categories will be explored in more detail than others. Remember, this isn't a scorecard, it's a heuristic. It's a way to talk about patterns of power and behaviour in politics and to ask, are we seeing echoes of the past? If you're not in one of the myriad of categories in the crosshair of the current administration, you might think this analysis hyperbolic. But perhaps the lesson of the 20th century is that this stuff can creep up on us. While not a polemic, let's say there's certainly some evidence for the prosecution. However, what we're seeing in American politics is not completely unique to our time. Nonetheless, even Max Hastings, former editor of the dementia patient of the British press, The Telegraph, asked if we are being coy with the F word. That a list of sensible people are asking the question or even downright yelling it from the rooftops. Yes, it's not just the libtards saying it anymore.
You notice now everybody's using the word.
An unsettling question has been dominating the US presidential race. Is Donald Trump a fascist?
So the F word.
Fascist.
Fascist. I would actually say that we're seeing fascistic tendencies. I think there are fascistic postures.
Fascist.
Fascist.
Fascism.
Fascism. Fascist to the core.
I am your voice.
You've quoted General Milley calling Donald Trump a fascist.
Trump did say he would be dictator for one day on day one.
Fascism.
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 Do you consider Trump a fascist? Because Milley clearly does.
Yeah, I think that requires believing Trump can think in a consistent philosophical framework for more than about 10 or 15 seconds, and it's just not possible.
Don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know.
Is Donald Trump really a fascist, as some would say? Or is the word authoritarian sufficient?
This is all straight from fascism.
And I think any Jewish people that vote for a Democrat, I think it shows either a total lack of knowledge or great disloyalty.
Fascist.
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 It's okay to know it's Mussolini. Look, Mussolini was Mussolini.
I alone can fix it. You're a McDonald's bitch.
This comes out of fascism and also the tradition of military dictatorships like Pinochet in Chile.
A fascist.
This is textbook authoritarian takeover 101.
Fascist.
On a fascism scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being peak fascism, how would you rate Trump's first week?
Fascist.
Is a glaring sign that it's a golden age for abuse in government and even corruption.
We must abandon any pretense that what is happening to the United States falls within the parameters of the normal, as we have known it. It does not. Fear and hatred are the tire levers in Trump's toolkit.
Under the 1990 Treaty of Versailles, Germany had been banned from maintaining a large standing army or developing advanced weaponry. When the man with the Charlie Chaplin tash came to power, he promised to restore the nation's pride, drag it out of economic hardship, and flip the bird to an international community that had been taking advantage of it. Within a week of his chancellorship, he told his military leaders he wanted to take lands to Germany's east and seek their Germanization. Much like how I'm starting this video with very unsubtle comparisons, after some policies that boosted Germany's economic growth in the short term, the goose-step national champion of 1933 wanted to announce his nation's new age and wave his might around a bit. On the 16th of March 1935, the painter-turned-problem declared the creation of the Wehrmacht, reintroduced conscription, and publicly announced the existence of the Luftwaffe's 800 planes, all in direct violation of the treaty. This was coupled with a military parade. Uniformed troops marched in tightly disciplined formations. Modern military equipment, including those new Luftwaffe planes, was showcased for the public. Top party officials oversaw the event from elevated platforms, delivering speeches emphasising national rebirth and military pride. Emblems and regalia covered every available surface. Military bands blared nationalist marches, showing the Doom Daddy of Deutschland was the right guy for the job. This parade wasn't just symbolic, it marked a turning point in European politics. It demonstrated the angry Austrians' willingness to dismantle the post-World War I order that America had sort of helped create, daring the international community to respond. The public unveiling of Germany's rearmament was framed as a patriotic act of defiance, setting the tone for the expansionist policy to come. It also highlighted how quickly a few men clad in Hugo Boss could normalise extreme policy shifts through public ritual and visual theatrics. When do we recognise this turning point? To misquote Mark Twain, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Unlike, say, the spread of international communism, fascist policies are nationalist in nature. Thus, every nation it forms in will have its own peculiarities, despite them having things in common. So they might not be goose-stepping, but are military parades really going to be giving it the stars and stripes strut down the streets of America's cities as a show of force? Well, your boy loves a military parade, that's for sure, but those don't make you a fascist. Otherwise we'd have to count the French in that category. Neither does rearmament. The difference is, Germany's 1930s militarisation was in part about flaunting international rules and seeing if nations would respond, just as much as it was about building a hard power base. Also, I love this. It's a parade the French threw Trump performing that year's hit song Get Lucky by French electronic duo Daft Punk. Macron smiling like a kid, everyone else having a whale of a time. Everyone except Mr. Politics of Resentment over here. The Donald's love of pageantry isn't lost on the leaders of the world. For much of his first term, it appeared Trump enjoyed the trappings of presidency rather than the actual work. After this trip, he pushed for a military parade in Washington, D.C. Of course, Trump also seems to be on campaign mode, even more so than other presidents with his frequent rallies. Advisors claimed Trump struggled to stay focused on complex issues, often bringing conversations back to personal grievances or media coverage. He reportedly avoided detail in policy discussions and kept intelligence briefings particularly brief. Also, there's a weird choice coming up from the editors here. It looks like they're about to be drone striked. I guess Obama wasn't invited. Trump got his wish recently, though as noted by those who watched, it was all a bit shambolic really. With a shoddy turnout, Trump's usual repertoire of entry music, such as The Village People, meant no drums were present, making marching in lockstep nigh impossible. With empty bleachers, drones that didn't fly, and sponsors, yeah, you do you, America. It wasn't the grand spectacle expected. By coincidence, Britain was having its own march off for the King that day. Called Trooping the Colour, Britain's reputation for pomp and pageantry remains intact, it seems. See, that's how you march, lads, with a dead animal in your head, 10 pounds of fur on your noggin in the blazing sun, as God intended. Except that guy. Where's he going? Trump's eye for spectacle is not limited to military parades. Lavish ceremonies for everyone from evangelical leaders to ex-prisoners to winning Super Bowl teams. The latter of which got a banquet of traditional American cuisine, and his love for foreign visits such as his trip to Saudi Arabia, or the lavish reception at the UK cements Trump as the media president. Media being one of the few things those closest to him say he's truly knowledgeable about. He reportedly spends hours watching Fox News among other networks, often tweeting in real time. He hired Larry Kudlow and John Bolton after seeing them on television. His current defence sec is a former Fox News pundit, and he is notorious for hiring people that look like they are from, quote, central casting. That is, people who look like they should be in the job they are in. One of the saner picks for Trump, H.R. McMasters, was one of these picks. I suppose broken clocks and all that. But Trump was not the first media-savvy political figure to eye the White House. In The Plot Against America, American novelist Philip Roth builds on the real historical figure to imagine what fascism might look like in pre-war America. A breakout hero of the mass media age, Charles Lindbergh is the novel's central figure. His fame comes from a 1927 solo flight across the Atlantic, and later becomes a vocal isolationist and goose-stepping sympathiser. But history takes a somewhat fantastical turn. Rather than fading into obscurity, Lindbergh arrives by plane at the 1940 Republican Party convention in Philadelphia, as a packed hall finds itself in deadlock. A deadlock in American politics? Perish the thought. When the floor erupts in cries of adoration, he is swiftly made the party's nominee for president. Lindbergh, a man with no political experience but unparalleled media savvy, ignores the advice of his advisors and campaigns by piloting his iconic solo aircraft, the Spirit of St. Louis, from state to state, wearing his flight goggles, high boots and jumpsuit. This 1930s vision of barrel-chested populism beats Franklin D. Roosevelt to the presidency, and Lindbergh, whose campaign is later revealed to be linked to the aforementioned Mr. Mustache, goes on to sign peace treaties with America's enemies, and a wave of anti-Semitism and violence is unleashed across America. I'll let you draw your own comparisons. Stylistically, Big T is closer to Sinclair Lewis's Buzz Windrip from It Can't Happen Here. Brash, bombastic and downright vulgar, Buzz vigorously tub-thumps the populist beat.
Windrip plays an almost clownish figure before things go south in the land of the brave. Also written in the 1930s, both show a rather steep decline into authoritarianism. They reveal a general anxiety in 1930s America, asking if what is happening in Europe can happen there.
This question is posed in a more academic context in Daniel Ziblatt's and Stephen Levinsky's How Democracies Die. Given the severity of the economic crisis in 1930s America, why didn't fascism take root?
To quote, "The reason no extremist demagogue won the presidency for 2016 is not the absence of contenders for such a role, nor is it the lack of public support for them. To the contrary, extremist figures have long dotted the landscape of American politics. In the 1930s alone, as many as 800 right-wing extremist groups existed in the United States. Among the most important figures to emerge during this period was Father Charles Coughlin, an anti-Semitic Catholic priest whose fiery nationalist radio program reached up to 40 million listeners a week.
The depression still waxed strong as the powers of deflation reached out to confiscate homes, to capture farms, and to keep that ever-marching army of jobless upon our streets, wondering when God in his mercy would lift his hand. I dared you and challenged you to organize so that the people, if not the president, would drive the money changers from the temple, and you did it.
Apologies, Thorndike, your very good channel doesn't exist anymore, so I figured fair game. Better give credit where credit's due, to quote the man himself.
God hates the hypocrite.
Those hand movements remind you of anyone? Father Coughlin was openly anti-democratic, calling for the abolition of political parties and questioning the value of elections. His newspaper, Social Justice, ironic given that phrase's current connotations, adopted pro-fascist positions in the 1930s, naming Mussolini its Man of the Week and often defending the Goose Step regime. Going back to that speech, we can see the link.
My dear friends, that among other things in the National Union for Social Justice, we are Christian insofar as we believe in Christ's principle of love your neighbor as yourself, and with that principle, I challenge every Jew in this nation to tell me that he does not believe in it. Of communizing all the factories and the fields and the forests and the mines.
Despite his extremism, Father Coughlin was immensely popular. Fortune magazine called him just about the biggest thing to ever happen to radio. He delivered speeches to packed stadiums and auditoriums across the country. As he travelled from city to city, fans lined his route to see him passing by. Some contemporary observers called him the most influential figure in the United States after Roosevelt. The Depression also gave rise to figures like Louisiana Governor and Senator Huey Long, aka the Kingfish. Long was described by historian of American politics Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr. as the greatest demagogue of the day, a man who resembled a Latin American dictator. Impeached in 1929 and assassinated in 1935, we simply do not have time to go into him. America's authoritarian tendency persisted through post-World War II America. Senator Joseph McCarthy, who used the Cold War fear of communist subversion to promote blacklisting, censorship and book banning, enjoyed a wide backing amongst the American public. At the height of McCarthy's political power, polls showed nearly half of Americans approved of him. Even after the Senate's 1954 censure of him, McCarthy enjoyed 40% in Gallup polls.
One communist among the American advisors at Yalta was one communist too many. And even if there were only one communist in the State Department, even if there were only one communist in the State Department, that would still be one communist too many.
A decade later, Alabama Governor George Wallace's defiant segregationist stance vaulted him into national prominence, leading to surprisingly vigorous bids for the presidency in 1968 and 1972. He was, as journalist Arthur Hadley wrote, a master at exploiting plain old American rage. Wallace often encouraged violence and displayed a casual disregard for constitutional norms.
Don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know. I have to respond by saying again, I have brilliant lawyers that work for me.
In short, Americans have long had an authoritarian streak. It was not unusual for figures like these to gain the support of a sizable minority, 30 or even 40% of the country. It's sometimes felt as if America's political culture is in some way immunised from goose-steppers, but this requires reading history with rose-coloured glasses. These images you see now were taken at Madison Square Garden, the site of a Trump rally decades later. This is all to say that despite its beginnings as a revolutionary democratic power, America is not a uniquely anti-authoritarian state. No nation is. In fact, if we look at the Lincoln Memorial, we see him clutching two fasces. The fasces, or fascio littorio, is a bundle of rods, sometimes tied around an axe, an ancient Roman symbol of the authority of the civic magistrate, carried by its lictors. The symbology is clear. Individually the rods are weak, but together strong. The axe symbolises the authority to punish and execute. It showed Rome's supremacy, as the axe is especially meant for those outside the city of Rome, where the full military authority could be exercised. Inside the city, the symbol is often seen without the axe. It is the idea of muscular nationhood, a cultural supremacy harkened back to in its modern guise. A well-oiled machine working for a nation's common goals. Rather than the flabby, unofficial connections of Burkean conservatism's little platoons, or the decline into decadence that liberalism supposedly provides. The motto of the United States used to be E pluribus unum, out of many one. It's not hard to see the connection. Of course, these are just trappings, symbols whose meaning has changed since they were implemented long ago. Some even say that the word fascist has lost all meaning, having been bandied around so much by Trump's more screeching detractors. I guess we'll see. Only history books can give us the final word on that. I think I may have just undermined this video by saying that, but never mind, onwards and upwards.
No coats. Confiscate their coat. You know, you can't win. By the way, just to finish, I had one word left, Iraq.
One of the issues with fascist regimes, and a sort of raison d'etre for this video, is how to spot them coming. Dr. Lawrence Britt's Fascism Anyone? Builds on Umberto Eco's seminal Fascism by analysing 7 regimes. In conjunction with the US Holocaust Museum, he produces 14 early warning signs of a coming fascist regime. America. In Philip K. Dick's Man in the High Castle, the Allies lose the war, and a foreign German ideology takes over the US. In order to operate efficiently, it must integrate itself with familiar American aesthetics. Clean-cut suburbs, smiling families, baseball, and 1950s consumer culture. Rather than jackboots on cobblestone streets, it uses cultural continuity and repurposed nostalgia to embed itself into society. Snap back to reality, and the point is nationalism and patriotism take different forms in different nations. The Americans have always seemed very, flag-wavy to us over the pond. That's not to say it's bad, it's just different. Okay, sometimes it's bad. That kind of overt, wear your country on your sleeve approach is only really associated with nationalist politicians over here. And we have a somewhat derogatory term for it, flag shagging. I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's difficult to quantify cultural differences. Nonetheless, I think it is clear that Trump has made, at the very least, the Republican Party more nationalist.
So we're going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America.
Hell, Steve Bannon is constantly going on about
economic nationalism.
And it's difficult to see a movement with the phrase
America first
as anything but. The space between nationalism and patriotism is one that has been considered by many of the 20th century's great figures. Orwell, in his notes on nationalism, emphasises that patriotism is a personal defensive affection for one's country, whereas nationalism is an aggressive pursuit of power and dominance. The American journalist Sidney J. Harris said the difference between patriotism and nationalism is that the patriot is proud of his country for what it does, and the nationalist is proud of his country no matter what it does.
The first attitude creates a feeling of responsibility, the second a feeling of blind arrogance. Or that eternal America skeptic Charles de Gaulle. Patriotism is when love of your own people comes first. Nationalism is when hate for others comes first. America has never been short of patriots. The worry, of course, is that in many examples in history, the turn to nationalism is a border crossed in silence and then sealed with thunder. If you could imagine an American doing anything quietly, that is. Only joking. Please don't nuke us. We've only got 6 of them left now.
Deported.
You just have to look at the deportations of US citizens to El Salvador for that. This is part of his immigration crackdown. It's been said that the current administration has a just do it strategy for governing. That is, details and minutiae get in the way of most government plans. To take this further, quote, deep state machinations are responsible. That is, civil servants that purposely don't follow or purposely slow down the implementation of directives from elected officials. The deep state is a term with conspiratorial overtones and the necessary vagueness that requires. A better term is the administrative state, by legal and political theorist James Burnham.
We're the true anti-fascists. Fascism looks to worship the state. The Trump movement has 3 things: economic nationalism, American first national security policy, and deconstruction of the administrative state. The progressives over the last 40 or 50 years have built up an administrative state bigger than the cabinet departments we have. It's something the founders never, it's a 4th branch of government.
The idea that the checks and balances of American governance have been used in aggressive, undemocratic ways by unelected bureaucrats to get in the way of popular policies. But in the age of Trump, it has been given a semantic rebranding. Administrative state just sounds too academic for the Alex Jones acolyte. It must be repackaged in populism, pushed through bullhorns slick with fear sweat, mutating from critique to a Brooks Brothers-clad bogeyman lurking in the ducts of every federal building. The administrative state is a coherent theory. The deep state, its meth-addled cousin. The solution is a sort of, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission kind of governing, bulldozing their way through the civil service, the courts, and inevitably the Constitution. Except they don't ask for forgiveness, they just send a man wanted by El Salvadorian cartels to an El Salvadorian jail. They're even doxing the spouses of these essentially trafficked individuals, trampling on the most basic right to privacy for individuals already caught up in rights violations, throwing them to the mercy of their troll farms and nutcases. They really are trying every nasty trick in the book. Adam Serwer of The Atlantic coined the phrase "the cruelty is the point" for all this. I'm going to put on my balance hat for a second and say this strays too far into the realm of speculation. But if you ask me, it seems this administration sees laws that protect rights as more tactics by pinko lefty bleeding heart human rights lawyers and civil servants trying to scupper the will of real Americans.
But equally well, this is why I go back to my Russia experience. Russia, to deport me, would not have made the slightest bit of difference to them. They don't need my money in the way that, Nepal was very glad to have it. They don't need diplomatic relations with us in the same way that, France or Germany would be. And the US is now in that position where if they put off some people coming over by doing things that are ostentatiously cruel, that's kind of part of their shtick now.
Is this intentional or is it a side effect?
I think it's more like if you give people power, they might end up using it. You see what I mean? Like the incentives are all there to be more aggressive on the border. That's what the diktat is coming down from on high about. And the Trump administration likes these stories. As I wrote in the column, immigration is about the issue that Trump is polling on the most well. Actually, the deportation program, which I think is sort of disgustingly cruel in an overt way, has more favourables than unfavourables. That might change as people hear more details about it, but polarisation in the US is such that as soon as Donald Trump starts doing it, a load of people really like it.
Right.
And then the reverse happens, which is lots of Democrats who thought globalisation and free trade were bad and right-wing things have now suddenly become much more in favour of them. And this is one of the things that I think it's said so often about US politics that it almost becomes a truism, but genuinely it is so polarised to the extent that half the country takes its views on something almost straight down the line.
We have similar policies that we tried, though we weren't photoshopping evidence, to be fair. Rwanda was our deterrent state. We tried to build our own detention centre there, so it was very expensive and it didn't work. So I did release a book about this, and maybe it makes the case a bit better, but I'm not going to fucking read it. Now, is Trump locking up dissenters without hearings in Soviet-style show trials? No. But he is deporting the few he feels he can get away with, without first checking if they're even US citizens. But hey, what's a few innocent people sent to the worst prisons on earth between friends? Those who remember the reign of Bush II will note that this is not the first time the US has stuck bags over minorities' heads and thrown them into the back of vans.
The Bush era's extraordinary renditions was the practice of secretly detaining and transferring terror suspects to other countries, often where enhanced interrogation techniques were used without formal charges or trial. It bypasses normal judicial process, making it effectively extrajudicial detention and transfer.
President Obama has described the enhanced interrogation program as torture. Do you agree with him?
If it was torture, CIA would not have done it.
But isn't that because you've defined it not to be torture, as the lawyer?
Well, yeah,
But how would this have happened? Torture is illegal in America. That's why the transfers were to CIA black sites. Off-the-book CIA bases prepped across the globe. And speaking of Bush...
Our enemies are innovative and resourceful. And so are we. They never stop thinking about new ways to harm our country and our people. And neither do we.
Of course, Trump doesn't like China.
China.
But he does like Xi Jinping. That's a whole other kettle of fish we'll look in a few videos' time. But unlike other administrations, the enemy isn't foreign. To quote Umberto Eco, fascist societies rhetorically cast their enemies as at the same time too strong and too weak. On the one hand, fascists play up the power of certain disfavoured elites to encourage in their followers a sense of grievance and humiliation. On the other hand, fascist leaders point to the decadence of those elites as proof of their ultimate feebleness in the face of overwhelming popular will. Or to quote Suella Braverman,
it's the Guardian reading, tofu eating, wokarati, dare I say, the anti-growth coalition.
So of course, if their enemies are both strong and weak, they are both saviour and victim. Francoist Spain blamed Reds, Freemasons, secularists and liberals for Spain's collapse. They were seen as both a vast conspiratorial force and morally and spiritually weak. Like Trump, Franco positioned himself as a saviour figure, restoring Spain to its natural order against the internal saboteurs. Pinochet's Chile used the threat of Marxist subversion to justify purging universities, unions and the media. The left was portrayed as both hyper-organised and culturally decadent, intellectually dangerous, yet morally bankrupt. From regime to regime, internal enemies become tools for consolidating power, justifying repression and uniting followers in a mythic struggle. Trump's enemies are the usual lot: the press, globalists, liberals, Antifa, etc. Franco's Spain framed liberal intellectuals as both architects of chaos and the punchline for a Catholic restoration fantasy, much like how the past the fascists harken back to need not be historically accurate. In authoritarian playbooks, the enemy doesn't have to make sense, they just have to be useful.
Holy Jesus. What is that? What the fuck is that?
Here, the similarities run shortest. Trump doesn't seem particularly enamoured with the top brass, nor them particularly to him.
Lots of people told me not to do it. People were calling me up who really detested President Trump and saying you can't do it, it'll sully your reputation. And
if anything, the military is just another area where the woke mind virus has wormed its way into.
You might think it odd that this part is in the rhetoric section. His affinity for dictators doesn't help.
President Trump sees in authoritarian leaders the qualities that he wants other people to see in him.
Trump doesn't seem part of the cult of the war hero as many Americans do. Saying of John McCain, a man who was captured and tortured in a Vietnamese POW camp, as...
And I said, somebody should run against John McCain, who has been, in my opinion, not so hot. And I supported him. I supported him for president. I raised $1 million for him. It's a lot of money. I supported him. He lost. He let us down. But, he lost. So I never liked him as much after that, because I don't like losers. But Frank, let me get to it. He hit me. He's not a war hero.
He's a war hero.
He's a war hero.
5.5 years.
He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people that weren't captured, okay? I hate to tell you.
Do you agree with that?
He's a war hero because he was captured, okay? You can have, and I believe perhaps he's a war hero, but right now he said some very bad things about a lot of people.
Trump came in promising to end the forever wars. Despite his more bombastic territorial claims, Greenland is, of course, a distraction, part of the so-called shit show strategy. In Alexander Nazarian's book, The Best People, the term is the claim that rather than viewing the turmoil of Trump's administration as accidental, Nazarian suggests that it was a calculated approach to media management. That Trump would throw bombastic red herrings at the press and throw them off the scent of what he was really up to. Of course, now with the recent news of the Iran-Israel conflict, it's not Greenland that's going to pull Trump into a bloody, protracted conflict. It's this man.
You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Do you understand that?
Understand that Israel has pushed him
too far this time.
So the idea of Trump being at the front of a bunch of jackbooted paramilitaries marching down the streets of DC does seem a bit ludicrous. It is this lack of militarism and chaotic management style that distances Trump from fascist accusations the most. He just doesn't really have the aesthetics or the vibe. Of course, not all fascists are 100% in lockstep with their armed forces. Despite the complete intertwining of the civilian leadership with German military aesthetics, Mr. Mustache had a deep disdain for the Junker officer class within the Prussian military tradition that developed under Frederick William I and Frederick II. Characterised by old ritualistic noble society and social privilege, things like dueling scars were worn like badges of honour. The leader felt this noblesse oblige style, old Europe aristocratic warriors, closer resembling the Roman patrician soldier or the British officer gentleman ideal, were indulgent and evident of a class not serious about actual warfare or rule. When compared to his class of Volkarian Übermenschen or whatever mad ideas rattled around that amphetamine-sodden brain of his.
You've called women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals. Your Twitter account...
Only Rosie O'Donnell.
She's still very beautiful. I moved on her, actually. You know, she was down in Palm Beach. I moved on her, and I failed. I'll admit it. Whoa. I did try and fuck her. She was married. I gotta use some Tic Tacs just in case I start kissing her. You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the pussy. I can do anything.
Need I say more? It's also funny that a lot of the women he surrounds himself with are blondes, like some kind of Aryan Gaddafi-esque Amazonian guard. Trump's idea of America really is rooted in, like, kind of 1980s aesthetics, isn't it? So he's a pig and an essayer, no doubt, but for the legal subordination of women, we must return to Francoist Spain. His regime involved... The marital permission law meant until 1975, married women needed their husband's permission to work, own property, open a bank account, or even get a passport. Women were legally treated as minors under the guardianship of their fathers or husbands. Women's education was focused on domestic duties and Catholic values. Access to professional or public sector work was limited or discouraged. Single women could work labour jobs more freely, but were pressured to marry and become housewives. Divorce was illegal, as was contraception and abortion. Domestic abuse was underreported and trivialised. The legal system favoured male authority. And shock horror, the regime worked hand in glove with the Catholic Church to enforce patriarchal morality as national policy. And finally, the media was co-opted to heavily promote traditional gender roles, glorifying motherhood, obedience and submissiveness.
Liberal, 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 happy fun, la la la, human smuggling, fentanyl gas.
There's been a bit of an arms race between the liberal media and Trump.
What a stupid question that is. What a stupid question. But I watch you a lot. You ask a lot of stupid questions.
She's shocked that I picked her.
No.
She's like in a state of shock.
I'm not thinking, Mr.
That's
President.
okay. I know you're not thinking. You never do.
Look, between you people, don't talk to me that way. You're just a lightweight. Don't talk to me that way. I'm the president of the United States. Don't ever talk to the president that way.
Despite Fox News bending over and presenting its rear end to old mushroom knob.
Shaped like a mushroom.
He does have a plan, and he also brought in somebody I think is pretty smart, Larry Kudlow.
Most of America's media has rallied against him. Some would say past the point of objectivity, willing themselves to believe any old shite that comes their way if it says Trump bad. In 2015, the Washington Free Beacon hired Fusion GSP, a quote private research and strategic intelligence firm run by former Wall Street Journal employees. This is their website. It has no links, no contact information, and no information about who works there. With the Washington Free Beacon's editor-in-chief being the son-in-law to the inheritor of the neoconservative royal lineage, Bill Kristol, the paper was decidedly anti-Trump. Digging dirt for these Washington insiders was Christopher Steele, former MI6 and head of the Russia desk between 2006 and 2009. After Trump had bullied all the nerds on the stage at the primary debates...
First of all, Rand Paul shouldn't even be on this stage. I didn't want to...
Jeff, you cannot take...
More energy tonight. I like that. I never attacked him on his look, and believe me, there's plenty of subject matter right there. Here's the guy that buys a house for $179,000. He sells it to a lobbyist who's probably here for $380,000, and then legislation is passed. You tell me about this guy.
Fusion GSP was hired by Perkins Coie, then working for the Clinton campaign. Steele was not told explicitly that the research was for the Clinton campaign. I can't imagine it was hard to figure that one out, though.
The subsequent dossier was a batch of unverified memos, the most notorious claiming Trump hired prostitutes in a Moscow hotel bed once used by Obama and engaged in urination-related acts, allegedly filmed by Russian intelligence, compromat, to use the old Soviet term. The dossier alleged collusion between Trump's campaign and Russia, including claims that Carter Page met with Russian officials used to justify a FISA warrant,
Trump was cultivated for years,
Cohen met Kremlin representatives in Prague. As we heard, they got the wrong Mike Cohen. The campaign traded Ukraine policy for election help. WikiLeaks was a conduit for hacked emails. Mueller confirmed the leaks, not the collusion. A Russian diplomat left the US due to interference. Even the claim that Paul Manafort, tangible sleaze stuffed into a suit, managed a conspiracy of cooperation between the Trump campaign and Russian leadership had no conclusive evidence found. Manafort was later convicted on unrelated charges because he was literally conjured up by a dark wizard to create the world's sleaziest creature. The wizard was unsuccessful. That title belongs to Manafort's former law firm partner, Roger Stone.
Roger Stone left court and said nothing after being sentenced to just over 3 years in prison for obstruction, witness tampering, and lying to Congress.
The two claims that hold any water are that Russia attempted to interfere in the election, something that nations do to each other all the time, even to allies, and that Russia aimed to exploit divisions within the Democratic Party by targeting Bernie Sanders supporters. Which is basically the same thing. Not the first time the Russians had tried to manipulate the American left. The FBI even offered Steele $1 million to verify his claims. He was unable to. So, it was bullshit. I mean, I don't have the kind of evidence to call a former spook a liar in court, but it's clear the dossier was unverified, exaggerated, and based on dubious sources at best. Steele would probably say that this is what is called raw intelligence. The people this was for knew some of this probably wasn't true, and it was not meant for mass consumption. I bring up this egregious example because the news media in America ate this shit up.
You couldn't go 5 minutes without hearing the words Russia collusion in 2016. Absolute crap sensationalised by the media without a shred of evidence. So it's safe to say that Trump's hold on America's media isn't the iron grip of a Mussolini.
His ability to manipulate the media space is, however, one of the areas he shows really unparalleled finesse and deftness. Much was made of all the free TV time he cultivated for himself, but it's not the hard-nosed power of banning news stations. This isn't to say that Don isn't trying to get more tangible power in the media sphere. His connection to the owner of Twitter, X, you know, that place where all the journalists chat online, has had a pretty obvious effect on that website. I had a whole section on this, but Trump and Musk had their very public falling out, bitching about each other like teenage girls on Twitter or whatever. So we're just going to go to the next section. You don't need me to go over this. You've seen the news. Of course, it's not just the gruesome twosome and their weapons of mass communication. J.D. Vance can bitch about the European approach to hate crime law all he likes, but it smacks a touch hypocritical when America drops to 9th place on the free speech ranking, tellingly lower than some of the European countries Mr. Vance has criticised. The most egregious example of suppressed speech is so far that of Mahmoud Khalil, a protester at the Columbia University Israel-Palestine protests. Mr. Khalil had his green card revoked without a hearing or even his knowledge. The Trump administration alleged that his activities were aligned with Hamas, a designated terrorist organisation, but the actual speech that has him currently in chains was not noted by authorities. Of course, this is not about one man at a university. In the end, Trump's approach to speech and the media are part of his transactional worldview. Does it benefit me? No? Well, then I don't like it. This is not the only use of so-called lawfare. Quote The Economist. On March 6th, Mr. Trump signed an order directing federal agencies to strip contracts and security clearances from Perkins Coie LLP, a law firm. That's the guys that hired Chris Steele, the MI6 agent, accusing it of dishonest and dangerous activity. The order cited past legal work on causes associated with Democrats. On March 7th, Mr. Trump signs an executive order to narrow the definition of public service, under which some workers may have federal student debt forgiven. Mr. Trump forbade relief to workers at activist organisations that, for example, engage in patterns of aiding and abetting illegal discrimination. That appears to be code for having a diversity, equity and inclusion programme.
Mr. Trump may have good arguments against these organisations, as well as against universities that indulge anti-Semitism while tightly policing other bigotry in speech. But he is not making these arguments. He's using his office to diminish perceived ideological opponents and redraw the boundaries of American debate.
For a set of guys supposedly on the free speech end of the argument, they sure are controlling a lot of speech.
while not sending troops into news stations and giving speeches into the camera a la Niger's Colonel Major Abdramanat. It is clear that Trump uses the law to suppress his political opponents' access to the public sphere and to settle personal vendettas. On April 22nd, 60 Minutes executive producer Bill Owens resigned after 26 years, citing a loss of editorial independence. He said CBS's parent company, Paramount Global, had increased oversight just as it sought approval for an $8.4 billion merger with Skydance Media, a merger Donald Trump must sign off. Days later, 60 Minutes anchor Scott Pelley addressed the issue on air, warning that scrutiny around the stories on Trump and the Israel-Gaza conflict were undermining editorial freedom. No stories were blocked, but independence was eroding. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is suing CBS and Paramount for $20 billion, claiming they deceptively edited an interview between presidential candidate Kamala Harris and Liz Cheney, daughter of former shadow president Dick Cheney. CBS calls it baseless, but the settlement is reportedly on the table to ease the merger process. At the same time, the FCC, led by Trump appointees, have revived an investigation into that same interview. The moment recalls past controversies, like when CBS shelved its 1995 expose on big tobacco under corporate pressure. However, the overall hostility to the media feels new. Even Richard Nixon's notorious relationship with the liberal media wasn't like this.
I have never heard or seen such outrageous, vicious, distorted reporting in 27 years of public life. I'm not blaming anybody for that. Perhaps what happened is that what we did brought it about, and therefore the media decided that they would have to take that particular line. But when people are pounded night after night with that kind of frantic, hysterical reporting, it naturally shakes their confidence. And yet, don't get the impression that you arouse my anger. You see,
I have that impression.
You see, one can only be angry with those he respects.
Mr. President.
Nixon definitely thought the press had it out for him. He blamed them for his presidential defeat in 1960 and his loss in the California gubernatorial election of 1962. However, in his 1968 comeback, Nixon received a fairly favourable treatment from the press as the new Nixon, with a plan to end the Vietnam War. This didn't last long. As bombings carried on in Cambodia, so did the animosity. Nixon faced a consolidated media environment, 3 main TV networks, CBS, NBC and ABC, and dominant national newspapers, New York Times and Washington Post. Nixon had had it with these East Coast liberals and went to war. On the front line was Spiro Agnew, his vice president. Agnew called the television news people a closed and tiny fraternity of privileged men elected by no one and enjoying a monopoly sanctioned and licensed by the government. But Nixon's war was not one of mostly open-pitched battles in the public sphere like Trump. Old Tricky Dick was a keen strategic thinker, preferring lawfare, smear campaigns, and other methods of subterfuge. These two men's approaches are of course defined by the media structures of their time. Trump operates in a fragmented, fast-moving digital environment. Social media gave him direct access to millions before he became president. Nixon famously coined the phrase the silent majority. His attacks on the press were indeed of a quieter nature. He had enemy lists, ordered wiretaps on journalists, and used the IRS against critics. He delegitimized individual reporters through surveillance and smears, such as the wiretaps found on columnist Joseph Kraft, revealed during the Watergate hearings. He had the Department of Justice file antitrust charges against 3 television networks, and threatened to revoke television station licenses by manipulating the FCC. To quote history teacher Don Levy, it is abundantly clear that Nixon intended to attack the free press more ferociously in his second term, but the Watergate cover-up collapsed in the spring of 1973, saving the nation from a war between the presidency and the free press. No one knows who would have won. Trump's attacks are public, blunt, theatrical, calling out journalists by name in rallies and press briefings. Encouraged crowds boo and chant against reporters. Indeed, Trump's majority is anything but silent. But despite not being as loud, I argue that Nixon's attacks on the press were more effective. The escalation in hostilities between Nixon and the press is what made the backlash so intense. Nixon's actions contributed directly to the constitutional crisis known as Watergate. His administration's illegal actions against the press, mostly a break-in at a journalist psychiatrist's office, became part of the case for impeachment. While more bombastic, Trump's attacks on the press are mostly rhetorical, but they are escalating as well. His administration has revoked press credentials
for example CNN's Jim Acosta, and tried to block publications, for example John Bolton's book. There has been threats, but not the same Watergate level abuses of power. There's a sort of irony where the USA has its famous separation of church and state, yet running as an atheist for the longest time was a great way to get your campaign torpedoed.
God bless America.
God bless America.
God bless you. God bless the United States of America.
Whereas in Britain, we have bishops in the House of Lords. I mean, we literally have a state religion, the Church of England, with the monarch at its head. But overt religiosity in actual politics is considered yucky. Blair tried it a bit, he's a Catholic. It just didn't vibe, we don't trust it over here. Contrary to popular belief, he did not have an area outside a church cleared by the National Guard for this picture.
It's called fake news.
But he did sign an executive order establishing a presidential commission on religious liberty, which does bring church and state closer than I think secularists would like. But for the non-Americans watching, whenever you hear executive order, it's something that can be thrown away by the next guy, literally on day one. The explosion of executive orders in the last few presidencies is more a sign that Congress has ground to a halt, rather than a sign of imperialism from the presidency. In fact, tossing away all the previous presidents' executive orders has become somewhat of a performance these days. As we see here, it's just something that happens with every presidency. The executive orders get wiped, the opposition tries to impeach the president, and lots of people run away with millions of taxpayers' dollars. Also, I don't want to presume to know how to run the White House, but it really should start putting more ink in those pens. Knowing the world today, something's probably happened while I've been writing and recording this, but really, there's not a whole lot to say here, because one of the few ways Trump is not broken with tradition in American politics is by following the age-old tradition of pretending to be a Christian for the Christian right demographic.
The church he supposedly attended in New York is Marble Collegate Church, though the church made his absence very clear.
Church, Jamaica.
He is also flogging Bibles now.
By my mother.
Oh, and J.D. Vance killed the Pope. Okay, this video has been a case for the prosecution. I'll admit that's because the evidence for a guilty verdict is more sensational, more entertaining to talk about. Earlier in this video, we spoke about how spectacle can change the body politic. Do you remember before this US election, Big T was being sued? We all thought that this election was going to be characterised by courtroom drama. Then a person tried to assassinate him. Twice. Yeah, you all forgot about that second one, didn't you? I know, it wasn't as photogenic, but it happened. But we all forgot, because this has all got so crazy. We've become desensitised to it. Nonetheless, this is kind of what happens when you stomp your feet and call Trump. And there may have been a tiny part of your brain that wanted to watch his head pop like an orange water balloon full of pig blood. But suppress that urge. By the look on Melania's face, she's going to do that job for you. Naturally, it's going to be quite difficult for me to suggest that we tone our language down, so I'll simply say that perhaps we can watch our P's and Q's when talking to each other, and save our scorn for the real villains, even when we may not agree on who they are. And most people want the best for their country, even if they disagree on how to achieve it.